Hi, this is Nicole Rivera, and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast. This week I had a huge aha moment about my own personal writing origin story. And the thing that turned me, or shifted me from a storyteller and an imaginer to an actual writer. What was that thing in your journey, in your story, that made you feel the need to write everything down? Because all of these things that you write could exist in your mind. You could transmute them orally, like I'm doing here on a podcast, but something shifted in you at some point in your life where you said, it's got to be written. And I'm wondering what that was. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about where I heard a story of somebody giving their big dream, their big moment, their thing that drove them to write. And it sort of cracked open a question in my mind about what was my motivation. And as a result, has made me curious about yours. So what's your origin story? Take a listen to my long rambles, and then I think the question will be clearer. But here it goes, all from listening to another podcast. Last week I was listening to a podcast. I'm not even sure what podcast it was, what the episode was. But there was a podcast interview of an author who had recently published a book, and I believe it was a nonfiction book, because I think the podcast I was listening to was about some other topic, big topic, and this person happened to write a book about that topic. Anyway, she had recently published a book, and it was her second book, but that book spent its first week or couple of weeks at the top of the bestseller list. So the interviewer asked her about the feeling that she got when she received the news. You know, like when you're the author of the book, it's not like you find out when you open the paper. Usually somebody from the publication company, or if you have an agent, you get that call and say, it's coming. You're about to be at the top of the bestseller list. And that's what had happened with her. She had gotten a phone call. And the author responded by saying something along the lines like, like most writers, it's a thing I've always dreamed of since the moment I started writing. Like, I remember being a kid thinking someday I'll be, I'd want to be on the bestseller list. And her point was, it was this, such a lofty, ridiculous dream that she never, she couldn't believe that it had actually happened. It was like, wow, this moment that was like a child's dream is here. And so, and she and the interviewer just sort of commiserated around, how few people do get that honor, and what a wonderful sort of experience it is, and how she celebrated with the family. But it was something about the way she had mentioned that it was something she had dreamed about from childhood, something that she had, always put in the back of her mind when she had started writing, that struck me. I listened to the rest of the podcast, whatever it was about, and later on, that was still with me. And I was like, well, all right, when this happens to me, when I have like these snippets of things that I hear or read or whatever, and they linger, then I stop and I'm like, okay, Nicole, what is it? What is what? How many different people have you heard say something so similar? So yeah, I thought about it, and I was like, okay, so what is it about that point that I can't shake? And I just thought about it, and I said, well, she's talking about like being a kid, dreaming of being a writer, dreaming of someday getting a book on a bestseller list. And it hit me that I never had that thought. That wasn't the way I dreamt of it. And so, because I'm in this moment of like self-inquiry, I'm like, okay, so great, Nicole, fine. Everybody has different thoughts and different dreams. What did you think about? And this is really what is my topic this week, this massive aha that I had about myself and what it could potentially mean for you if you have a similar sort of aha moment. So what I realized is that, and you may have realized this if you're a longtime listener of Stop Writing Alone, is that as I continue to work with writers more and more who are writing and their goal is to publish, their desire to get to that end game is something that I've become sort of envious of. Like, I see people like going straight from one step to the next, and they're like, I can't wait till my book is published. And I don't have that same feeling. I'm like happy that I wrote my stories, that I've done my writing, and that some people are reading it. And I keep wondering why that is. And this interview got me to what I believe is my core reasoning. You know, because I've started to question myself. I'm like, am I not like a go-getter? Do I not want to share my words with the world? Like, what is going on, Nicole? Like, why don't you want to get your books published? Why haven't you done this? Even when I finished Girl Unplugged, I had some literary agent interest, you know, right away in the pitch wars competition, and life got in the way. I mean, at that moment, there was nothing that I could do. But once the clouds cleared and life got back onto its normal schedule, it wasn't like this burning desire in me to like jump back out there and get this book out into print. So again, like, what is that? So, and the reason it's becoming a heavier sort of contemplation for me lately is twofold. One is I've been talking about the Stop Writing Alone book because I've been writing it. I wrote it, a draft last year, and I've been this past Happy Campers Club. I brought it to my critique partners. So I've been working in revisions. And I'm really happy with this process of writing the book. I'm really happy with this process of bringing it to people in critique. And it's been, and I'm feeling like I'm hitting the danger zone, that because my critique partners have read pieces of it, I feel satisfied already that the Stop Writing Alone book has been read. I'm like, no, Nicole, that's not the point. You're supposed to keep going. And I get, supposed to is always like a red flag for me. I'm like, what does that really mean? So this interview where this woman talks about the dream that she had when she was a kid, the thing that sort of like really inspired her to write. She said, I imagine stories. I think of great stories. I'm going to actually write them down so that they can be in books and be on bestseller lists. Got me thinking. It was never really my desire, right? And so what was my desire? Why did I start writing things down in the first place? And I think everything comes right back to, this is going to sound really bizarre, Anne Frank. So I've always loved stories. I've loved reading them. I've loved making them up and sharing them. But my first experience with that was telling stories. I would tell stories to my brother, and I would never really write them down. Taking the time to write them down didn't start to feel like an important thing until I read The Diary of Anne Frank. And it wasn't in the hopes that, my words would someday be published in a book that would be stocked on bookshelves in libraries and schools or bookstores. It was in the hopes, I can't help but laugh because it seems so strange, that my words would someday be read by someone who didn't know me at all, but would come to know me through my words. Like, I never even dreamed of like book cover designs or my words in print. My dream, every time I opened up my notebook to write, and this goes all the way through college, like I'm talking about writing as a child in my notebooks, writing stories, writing my diaries, writing my poetry when I was a teenager, continuing journals into college. Anytime I started to write a fictional story, I was never dreaming of the endpoint of a book. I dreamt of I hope there is at least one person out there that can relate to this, because this feels weird admitting. I dreamt of future humans stumbling upon an old notebook filled with my handwritten stuff, like my poetry, my diary entries, my stories. Like, they would find it and read it. I just nearly always dreamt of people being in my home long after I had left. Like, maybe even archaeologists, like, digging out my home, finding a dusty, neglected book, flipping through its pages and discovering me, discovering pieces of me, and then sharing them with others, either by saying, look at this book, and just passing on that physical handwritten book, or just then continuing the oral tradition of telling them what they found, and then telling them the stories or the poems or, the snippets of my life that they found in my diaries. This is nuts. So it feels like the oddest hope for someone to have. But maybe it was some semblance, I'm thinking of like childhood Nicole, of hoping to matter in some way, that the ordinariness of my life would be interesting to someone later on. But I realize now that it never grew from there. That's really all I've ever wanted. And that's why sharing my stories online has always been enough. For me, anyway. Because my words sit out there on a website, now on Story Hoarder, right, and Substack. But in the past, when I had RiveraRunsThroughIt.com, that was like my first blog that I shared fiction on. When I wrote my blog, Searching for Sustenance, what was I doing? I was doing the same thing. I was like, for me, any of those spaces were like my digital notebooks. I didn't have, you can't put your dusty notebook on the computer, but it was like the internet became my new home place, and I was scratching out words in hopes that somebody who didn't know me at all would stumble upon it, discover them, unearth them, read them, know them, maybe get to know a little piece of me, and maybe pass them along. And I'm done. And I'm good with that. So I said it before, this weight has, become heavier for me as of late. And I said the reason's twofold, but I think I only told you one reason. The one reason is that I have this story, Stop Writing Alone book, that it's like, okay, Nicole, this is the thing that you probably should publish, right? And then the other thing is that I'm working with writers where their goal has been, their dream has always been to get on a bookshelf, right? And that may be you. That may be you listening right now. And you say, well, Nicole, this is so strange. I've been listening to you to learn how to find community to help me get my book on bookshelves. And that's amazing. That's so many people that I write with, talk with, and grow and have been growing with. But I think it hasn't been me, right? And I've not really realized it. So the question is, what do I do with this? What do I do with this information? And why was this such an aha moment for me? If this has always been my dream, I should have known it, right? But the thing is, as a writer and as a writer coach, it feels like I should be doing more. I should be stepping up in some way. The aha moment for me right now is simply this. It's hard for me to even put it into words. I think what it comes down to is there is a part of me that wants to share my story with the world. And I've dreamt of one way of that happening. And I've been totally okay with that slow sort of process of people finding that story, finding those stories, and me not even getting the recognition in real time, right? Because my dream is pretty much like following the footsteps of Anne Frank. You're not even around when people find your words. However, through my work with Stop Writing Alone and connecting with so many writers in doing this work, I do believe there's some stuff that I've written that can be helpful to people, that in not getting it out there, I'm being selfish in some way. So I can't wait for a motivation to say, yay, I want my book on a bookshelf. I got to do this. I have to just make the decision to do it and just do it. And that's essentially it. And do it not for me. That is the aha. That is the aha. That if I'm publishing my anything, when I'm publishing it, I have to stop asking myself, do you want to do this? Because maybe it's not for me. Oh God, it's never been for me, right? Like, that's the point. It's not for me. So this next step of going through all of that is in service to whoever it is for, who needs it right now. So yeah, isn't that strange? The whole thing is really bugged out for me. And maybe you're like, I'm just going to stop listening to Nicole because she's talking absolute nonsense now. Who doesn't want to be published? Yeah. Yeah, really, really strange. So, and it's not to say that that's not a thing that I would be super excited about. At least I don't think so. I think I would be super excited to see my book in, my local bookstore, in the library, in schools. I think. I don't know. Would my shyness make that uncomfortable? That may be another whole thing embedded in there. However, yeah, it's a really strange one. And it's been one of these things that I'm like, I just feel like I need to share this with people, just in case there's anybody else out there that gets it. And also, yeah, I think it gives a little bit of context to why I've not put any of my stuff out there, or or been engaged in the process to do so. Because it's not like, oh, the second I go and try to publish something, immediately everybody's going to be like, oh, Nicole, we've been waiting for you. This is amazing. Because I did, I've done the submission process for a couple of things. I don't know. I never did my count. I don't know what I got up to when I tried last year to do 52 submissions in 52 weeks. I think I made it to around 20. Not sure. Maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sitting here thinking while you're listening to dead air. But the point is that when I lost interest, I just stopped. And it wasn't out of like, I'll never get out there. I just really just lost interest. So, yeah. I'm just fascinated by this because it's further understanding of how I can serve people, even in my community, and knowing when also I need to direct somebody to another mentor, So I think it's pretty clear to most of the people that I've worked with in Happy Campers that when you get to that part of your, like, you've done all your writing and you're finished and you're going into edits and you're going into critique, and now you're going to do whatever path it is for publication, whether it's self-publication or you want to start querying or what have you, that, I can help you with the stuff that I know, but that's not where my experience is. So it's a good idea to go find somebody who has that experience. But I think even when I do have that experience, that's not my wheelhouse for, I'm the person to speak to. Maybe I'll change my mind someday. I don't know. But right now it feels like it reminds me back when I was teaching. I love teaching the freshmen and the sophomores, the early stuff, pre-algebra, algebra. I loved teaching all of that, a little bit of probability and statistics, but I had zero desire to teach calculus, pre-calculus, and those things. It's not that I couldn't do these things. Clearly, I had a math degree. I could do any of them, but it's just like, nah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to teach that. I can do it with you. I can tutor you if you have a couple of questions, but I don't want to do that. I think that's where I fit with this whole publishing process. Like, it may be a thing that I will do for myself to get through to the next thing, just like I did calculus to get my degree. But it's not the part of the beauty of this whole art that I'm most interested in and feel like I could dive deep enough to then be a teacher in it, to help you through your path. Anyway, that was a long, drawn-out explanation of my thinking. But I just found the whole Anne Frank thing really interesting. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. I don't know. What was your dream that got you to say, I really need to start writing this stuff down? All of these things that are going on in my head. Not just that you had a drive to constantly create, but now you're going to write it, keep it, save it, continue working on it. When I had my blog, I used to run this column called Book Love, and I would interview people, or I would ask for a guest post. What was your first book love? And the sort of subtitle to the whole thing was, what was the book that either made you a voracious reader or want to be a writer? Like, those were my two groups of people that were engaging with my blog, writers and readers. And I think here I'm kind of asking beyond that, beyond the book love. Like, what was the thing, the idea that made you really want to be a writer in that sense of documenting it. And I think really like digging back to like childhood. You know, as a kid, no one's telling you, write it all down. You know, we play make-believe. We all have our imaginations, and we may be creating songs in our head and stories and all types of things. But something clicked in you. If you're listening to this podcast, you're a writer. Whether you are a professional writer or, you're still finding your space, you are identifying as a writer. And something clicked in you at some point in your life that said, I'm going to start documenting all these imaginings, all these things going on in my brain. And I'm curious what it was, if you can remember, if you can dig deep and see what was that thing that changed your mind. It could have been a book, right? It could have been, I mean, for me it was, right? It was the Diary of Anne Frank was my book, I think, that really, that whole story, that whole idea that made me feel like writing stuff down is incredibly important. And it's not that I didn't look around the world and say, to everybody in my life, like, you got to start writing stuff down. You got to start writing stuff down. It was that I needed to start writing stuff down, like, immediately. And then never stop. Oh my goodness. Never stop, and never feel like it's got to be printed on a bookshelf, because someday it'll just be stumbled upon, just like Anne Frank's book was. Such a strange discovery for Nicole. Anyway, I'm very curious. So I need to hear from you. In fact, I'll put this question up in the Stop Writing Alone Network and Mighty Networks. If I remember, I'll put it up on Facebook too. But I'm not sure. I'm going to have to find a really good way to word this question so that it's understandable in case people haven't listened to this episode. So I don't know if it makes sense. You'd be like, I don't know. I just started writing. I like to write. There's something, I think, that probably triggered you from make-believe and imagining and thinking of things to saying it has to be on paper. And maybe it was that you had the understanding that books, that stories went into books that people could purchase, and you wanted to make sure that your stories got into books that could be purchased. I don't know. Maybe that's how you get the dream of the bestseller. But that's my big question. That's my big aha. As you can hear from this episode, I'm still sort of grappling with the ramifications of it and what it means for me. But if you relate to it in any way, I'd love to hear about it. And and I hope everybody's doing well, and I hope everybody took whatever time they needed to in the past couple of weeks with especially here in America. There's just been lots of heavy stories. But I will tune back in next week, and happy writing on the in-between. Whatever your reason is for it, enjoy it, and I'll talk to you next Thursday.